Are you excited for Granblue Fantasy Relink? Well, the day has come. We were lucky enough to get a chance to have an early hands-on thanks to Games, and we finally have a release date of February 1st, 2024. And guys, I have to say, I think we might be onto a winner here, as we really enjoyed our time playing it, as it had a simple but refined approach to combat, absolutely epic music, and great visuals from everything that we experienced. But before we get into the juicy specific details, let's go over what Granblue Fantasy Relink is if this is your first time hearing about it. It's an action RPG being developed by Games based on the ever popular Granblue series, which is host to anime, mobile games, and more. This game tells a brand new story separate from the previous games, making it a perfect place for newcomers to the series to jump in, while also paying homage to the series itself and having lots of references to the greater Granblue universe, which means there's also a nod to fans of the series. So you might be wondering, what did we actually get to play? Well, we got over 5 hours of hands-on time with Granblue Fantasy Relink and Granblue Fantasy vs Rising, which is another title set in the same Granblue universe, but it's a fighting game instead. For the Granblue Fantasy Relink demo, we were given access to 7 of the different characters, and the actual stages were more a linear path with enemies that lead to a boss fight at the end against a massive skeleton boss. If you were good enough to complete the boss within a secret time limit, then you were actually able to get a second rock boss to spawn. So the structure of the demo was great for testing out the combat and mechanics of the characters, but it didn't really give us an insight into the overall game structure, such as the towns, the missions, and the multiplayer quests. While the demo definitely didn't answer every question we had about the game, it did reveal some very spicy details to us. Let's start with the combat. Each character has access to a basic attack and heavy attack, which at first may seem simple, but it can vary dramatically from character to character due to their own unique mechanics. For example, Catalina has a full combo string that mixes in basic and heavy attacks together to deal massive damage, while a character like IO is all about attacking to build up a meter that then allows her to deal huge damage with her spells. Alongside normal attacks, each character has 4 different skills which can be equipped, and these range from things like buffs, attacks, and mobility, and even being able to summon a mirror image of yourself. If you're a fan of very flashy and awesome looking moves, then you're going to be happy to hear that every character has an ultimate attack called a Skybound Art, which is triggered after a meter is built up from attacking enemies and then pressing in both of these sticks. Outside of straight up damage dealing, all characters were able to dodge, guard, and jump. Both the dodge and guard have perfect execution timings as well, but of course you will have to be good enough and time your button presses to give you those additional bonuses. For the dodge, a perfect dodge will make you invincible, while for a guard it will nullify all damage and make the enemy flinch. Alongside their normal combat mechanics, the game has a strong focus on party play, and while you're playing solo, these party members are controlled by AI, which seems from our experience pretty competent, as they would attack if you needed them to, and they were even able to revive you if you went down. But the best way to use the party members was through the link system. Just like in mobile games, the developers told us that they wanted party attacks to interact with each other, and there were 2 ways to do that in Relink. The first was through link attacks. By attacking stunned enemies using the link attack button, it will increase the link gauge, and once it reaches 100% for all party members, you're able to execute this for an attack that will slow down time around the enemy, while also granting you a ton of buffs with things like cooldown reduction and increased damage. But one of the coolest things about the link system is that it extends to the ultimate attacks, as characters can execute Skybound Arts one after another in a small window to create a Skybound Art full chain burst, which results in not only a damage increase for each successive ultimate, but also an extra 5th Skybound Art attack that happens after all characters have completed the full burst. Interestingly, we were able to do this a number of different times, and the resulting full burst attack was actually different depending on the order you executed the attacks in. So doing a full burst attack was extremely satisfying to pull off, and made you feel like an absolute beast, because not only does it do huge damage, but also leaves the enemy in a knockdown state, allowing you to get even more damage off as a follow-up by using some of your powerful skills. In general, the combat system felt super refined, and some of you would probably expect that in a modern combat game, and especially one that was started in development by a goated studio like Platinum Games. So let's go through the characters, as this is one of the main draws of the game, picking a cool character and getting new ones, as each character has their own set of combat skills and mechanics that are actually quite unique to them. Within the demo, we got 7 characters to play as we mentioned before. Here's what they were. Gran, the main character, which is kind of like a jack of all trades. Catalina, an easy to use character that has access to both melee and ranged. Rackham, an absolutely awesome ranged gun wielding character. Io, who is a mage and offers ranged supports and attacks. Lancelot, a dual wielding ice sword guy. Siegfried, this guy was basically like picking the greatsword in Monster Hunter because he had meaty attacks that you also had to time your button presses to deal more damage. And Charlotta, who's quick moving and ultra aggressive and is a sword wielder. For the game having such a simple button layout with essentially 3 attack presses and of course your skills, each character we tried felt distinctly different from one another, which is absolutely great for a game where getting new characters is the main draw. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to different characters, so let us know if you want a follow-up video going over them, because we have a bunch to talk about for each of them. I will say though, the character you pick will heavily impact your enjoyment on the game, as we started out with Gran, and that was okay but a little bit boring because most of his skills were focused on buffing and healing. But when we switched to Lancelot, which was a much more aggressive playstyle, things got way more fun very quick. And then the next big parts of the demo were the enemies themselves. In the demo there were both small mobs that we could quickly defeat and of course the 2 bosses we mentioned. The normal mobs were kind of what you would expect from an action game, and they basically ranged from goblins to skeletons. They had some basic attack patterns and nothing to write home about, but I expect this is because the demo we played is of course an introduction to the game, rather than putting us straight in front of some really beefy fleshed out mobs that we've previously seen in the trailers. The bosses, however, were really cool to fight and felt kind of like an MMO raid boss. Each one had several different attacks that felt dangerous, and everything was telegraphed properly. We usually dislike when a game has monsters that are so erratic and it makes it super difficult to predict and dodge their attacks, making it feel quite cheap. But at no point did we feel we were cheated by some cheesy mechanic of the game. If we got hit or died, it was fully our fault. One of the ways that the game achieves this fairness is with the indicator pools that look like they're lifted straight out of an MMO like Final Fantasy XIV or Lost Ark, as they easily allow you to time your dodges and see incoming attacks. We were very surprised by how entertaining the fights actually were. It kind of felt like we were fighting against monsters in Monster Hunter, as they have very similar attacks and patterns. In the trailer, we have seen some absolutely massive bosses, so it's going to be interesting to see how those battles play out. It is worth mentioning that the game will have assist modes for those of you that aren't familiar with action games. These assist modes basically simplify the controls and allow you to play it in a much more accessible way. The full assist mode only requires you to play using the analog stick. The game will do everything else for you. I know most of you will just sweat the game on the hardest difficulty, but I think it's a smart move by Cygames to include this, as they do have a large mobile game audience and it'll be interesting to see how they get on with the game. They did say the assist mode won't be accessible in the harder content, so there will be some restrictions on using it, but it will be interesting to see how it impacts things like farming items if players can just automate the game for getting rare items and farming by just using the analog stick. As you can see from the footage in the background, the game looks great with vibrant colors and amazing particle effects. I did notice a couple of frame drops during super intense moments, but this is a demo build, so these things usually do happen and hopefully won't be there in the final game. But we need to talk about the music in the game because it was amazing. If you're familiar with the Granblue music, you will probably know that this isn't something to worry about, and this is because it's composed by Tsutomu Narita and Nobuo Uematsu. Forgive me if I said their names wrong. If you know RPGs, you'll probably know these names before, as they have created some really iconic music. I will say though, our biggest issue with the sound is that the characters are constantly shouting lines.
Looking good! Looking good!
Which does get a little annoying the more you play, and hopefully this is reduced in the final game. Even though we really enjoyed our time playing, there were a few things that we didn't like so much and that we are concerned about. While the overall combat did feel really good, it did have some parts where it felt a little floaty and not as tactile as we would have wanted out of an action game. Hitting some enemies would feel like cutting a knife through butter, rather than a solid hit and stop that you feel in other action games like Monster Hunter, where you have a more weighted feeling. It could have just been for the demo, but the linear level that we played wasn't very mind-blowing, and if this is how all of the levels are, and it's just us running between small packs of enemies, with there being no other side objectives, it could get quite boring quite fast. But perhaps the biggest thing that we didn't like is that some characters were just straight up vastly better than others in terms of dealing damage with their basic attacks. Again, hopefully this is just an issue present content in the demo, as we didn't have access to the equipment menu and other things to build our characters. But in the demo, there were characters that could easily defeat the boss 2 to 3 times faster than the others. Overall, we are super happy with the game from what we did play, and we're super excited to play it again after having hands-on time. There are still a lot of unanswered questions about the game's structure that I think Cygames would have been better served having a broader demo with a town, equipment menu, and multiplayer available. We do know from the presentation that we will need to complete story quests to unlock multiplayer missions, of which there will be over 100 quests. And we feel that will be kind of make or break for the game, because if they expect us to grind for characters and gear, the gameplay loop and content needs to be super fun and engaging. Recently, a lot of games have failed at this, but from this small vertical slice that we played, it was definitely fun, and we definitely hope that this game will deliver as a satisfying action game. But ultimately, we will be holding our breath until we know what the end game truly is like. Also, monetization is currently unknown. It isn't looking like it's going to be a gacha game, it seems more like it will be to do with DLC and expansions, but this is currently unknown, so we will have to wait and see on the monetization front. Due to how polished this game was, it kind of felt like we were first encountering the Monster Hunter franchise, a game that was super fun and a massive hit in Japan, but only has a relatively small fan base in the West. Both Relink and Granblue are huge in Japan with over 35 million players, and Relink from the demo is feeling good, so hopefully if it can follow in Monster Hunter's footsteps and break through into the West, it could be absolutely phenomenal. But that is a huge mountain to climb, so we'll have to remain hopeful. Well, here's two of the boss fights where you can see a variety of different characters, skills, and things in action.
Careful. Looks like we found our leader.
After me. You got it.
Let's do it. Very cool.
Give yourself
You
more
are too
credit.
Thank you. Surrender! No escape! Give me this! This is power! Parry this! Can you best what you can't hit? Decimate! Pin them down! Looking good!
Ever tasted lead?
There!
Wrangler?
Dragon leg! Hit them now!
I got him! Batter up!
On me!
Of course. What did you expect? I'll cover you.
Forward!
That was awesome. You were awesome.
Get in there!
No, it is the real boss around these parts.
Weaker now! Frozen, ready yourself!
Saving this one.
Looking good! Looking good! There!
Go!
They're mine!
You
Right
got
behind you!
Break.
Surrender! Frozen, ready yourself!
Stop it! You're finished!
On my mark! Got it! It ends
Need
here!
cover fire?
Parry this! Find a way! This is power! On guard! Away with you! Surrender!
Well done.
This is power! Ready!
Keep going!
This one's mine. I'll cover you.
Got you
Always
for
double
you.
tap. Thanks. Did the damn thing, didn't we? Hot enough for ya?
Fire! Don't get ahead of yourself, okay?
Yeah. An opening. You won't fall. Not now, not ever. Ah! Catalina, I'll protect you. Fall now. Try to dodge this. Don't hold back.
I'm on it!
Look at that.
Oh yeah!
Just like that.
Go for broke!
Bring it. Gale burst.
That should be the last of them, which means quest complete.